Most people hear fascist and they think of a little mustache and goose-stepping. They never stop to ask a far more serious political question in the United States in 2022. When fascism comes, what precisely will it look like? This Thursday, President Joe Biden is slated to give a talk on unity. By unity, of course, he means agree with me or I will label you the enemy and seek to destroy you. That is the pattern for Biden and his White House. It's also a broader pattern with Democratic leadership over the years. If you don't march along to their tune, you are the enemy. At best, you are benighted and foolish. At worst, you're Nazis. You're probably Nazis. In 2008, Barack Obama suggested that small-town Americans get better. They cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustration. You, those who disagreed with him, were bigoted, bitter clingers. In 2016, Hillary Clinton told an LGBTQ plus minus divided by a sign happy face emoji group, quote, "I am all that stands between you and the apocalypse." She then added this.
You could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Now Joe Biden has labeled his political opponents semi-fascists. Not full fascists, mind you. Semi-fascists, like sort of Nazis. Speaking to a crowd of Democratic donors in Maryland, Biden said, quote, "What we're seeing now is either the beginning or the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy." Now, lest you think he was just criticizing Donald Trump, he went on talking about you. Quote, "It's not just Trump, it's the entire philosophy that underpins the, I'm going to say something, it's like semi-fascism." He then added, "The very survival of our planet is on the ballot. Your right to vote is on the ballot, even democracy." You see, if you oppose Joe Biden's agenda, you want to destroy the planet. You want to end democracy. You're basically Adolf Thanos. It's insulting enough that Democrats routinely label everyday tax-paying Americans their adversaries. It's even more insulting that our legacy media seems to participate in this pathetic game. After all, we've been told that Donald Trump labeling the press the enemy of the people was incredibly dangerous. But apparently, labeling plumbers who voted Trump the Mussolinis of the sticks is perfectly fine. What's most insulting, though, is the suggestion by people who don't give a damn about our republic's institutions, who actually hate those institutions, and who see them as obstacles to their own political dominance, that those who want to stop them are the real fascists. To believe this, you have to be totally and completely ignorant of what fascism actually is. And most people are. Most people hear fascist and they think of a little mustache and goose-stepping. They never stop to ask a far more serious political question in the United States in 2022. When fascism comes, what precisely will it look like? Well, if history is any guide, it's going to look like the vast centralization of power in the executive branch, subject to nearly no oversight by a vestigial legislature. Fascism in Germany, for example, actually predated Hitler. In 1930, Heinrich Brüning, a German centrist, became Chancellor of the Republic. He proposed a scheme of deflation and refusal to pay war reparations. When the Reichstag rejected this, President Paul von Hindenburg, a German field marshal during World War I and a widely worshipped figure nationwide, called new elections. The result was a massive upswing for both the communists and the Nazis. Brüning didn't have a majority. He decided to govern on the basis of the presidential emergency decree of Article 48 under the Weimar Constitution. That article said, quote, "If public security and order are seriously disturbed or endangered within the German Reich, the President of the Reich may take measures necessary for their restoration, intervening, if need be, with the assistance of the armed forces. For their purposes, he may suspend for a while, in whole or in part, the fundamental rights provided in other areas of the Weimar Constitution." Brüning's emergency rule turned into emergency rule under Franz von Papen, which then turned into emergency rule under Adolf Hitler. Hitler would solidify that emergency rule into full totalitarian government control. This is the pattern of fascism. Centralized power under emergency circumstances under the executive branch. Then it's just a matter of waiting for the right dictator. In Italy, for example, the king handed power to Benito Mussolini in 1922 under the Constitution. Mussolini then secured from the legislature dictatorial power for a year. That eventually became permanent dictatorship only in 1925. In fact, this has been the theme of dictatorship since ancient Rome. Democracies delegate more and more power to one man, who then wields those powers without regard to the legislature. Eventually, the pretense of legislative authority is simply wiped away. Sulla marched on Rome and became dictator decades before Caesar did. Republics don't die because one man takes power. Republics die because of a long chain of executive abuses maximizing centralized power. Which brings us back to Joe Biden and semi-fascism. In 2014, without control of the House of Representatives, President Barack Obama simply declared he would do things without any delegated authority.
We are not just going to be waiting for legislation in order to make sure that we're providing Americans the kind of help that they need. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders.
That same year, after having declared at least 22 times he did not have the constitutional authority to unilaterally change immigration law, President Obama simply suspended enforcement of immigration law for the so-called Dreamers. Then, during COVID, we saw the radical acceleration of semi-fascism. Federal and state governments locking Americans in their homes for up to 2 years, shutting down businesses and schools and churches, ending rent and student loan payments, forcing evidence-free masking policies and vaccine mandates. Originally, some of that might have been justified by an actual emergency, but when the emergency went away, the powers didn't. Joe Biden is the next step in the semi-fascist progression of American government. Upon taking office, he attempted to use the Occupational Health and Safety Administration to cram down a vax mandate on 80 million Americans. His basis, supposedly, was public health emergency. He then used the CDC to cram down an eviction moratorium the Supreme Court had already declared unconstitutional. Again, his basis was public health emergency. Then just last week, Joe Biden unilaterally declared he had canceled up to $500 billion, $500 billion in student loan debt, despite the fact that just last year, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said Biden had no authority to do that. His basis was, you guessed it, public health emergency. And the centralization of power in the executive branch is just beginning. In July, Joe Biden declared he would unilaterally reshape America's energy and economic policy based on, you guessed it, emergency.
So let me be clear. Climate change is an emergency. And in the coming weeks, I'm going to use the power I have as president to turn these words into formal, official government actions through the appropriate proclamations, executive orders, and regulatory power that a president possesses.
Under Biden, the CDC has declared that racism represents a similar public health emergency. America is well down the road to semi-fascism, but that's not because of the millions of Americans who voted against Joe Biden. It's because of politicians like Joe Biden, politicians who demand that you give them complete and total power, or they will label you the real semi-fascists.